The talk you're about to hear is by Zen teacher Sensei Amala Wrightson.
Today is the 20th of August 2019. 20th August just happens to be Roshi Philip Kaplo's birthday. And we're going to, over the next two teishos, take up a story from The Hidden Lamp. It's called Dōgen Sets the Record Straight. The full title of The Hidden Lamp, this great compendium of stories about women in Zen and in Buddhism, is the full title is The Hidden Lamp, Stories from 25 Centuries of Awakened Women, and it's by Florence Kaplo and Susan Moon. Picked this one today just because it was a chance to talk more about Master Dōgen. We had been looking at the Mountains and Rivers Sutra on Sunday, and this is a Sansuikyo in Japanese, a fascicle of the Shobogenzo, his great work, or one of his great works. And during that Dharma studies session, somebody commented that we don't know much about Dōgen, and I was surprised because over the years we've quite often dipped into his teachings, but it could be quite a few years since we last took up any of Dōgen's teachings, so it felt like it would be a good time to return to him and explore further. So we'll just read the case here, but then we'll spend most of our time looking at Dōgen's life and the sort of background to his teaching, and then take up the case in the next Teisho 2 weeks from now. So just to sort of set the scene for this, this is a story entitled Dōgen Sets the Record Straight, and it's also from an extract from one of the fascicles of the Shobogenzo, Treasury of the True Dharma Eye. It's known as Rai-hai Tokuzui. It means something like, talks about making obeisance, doing prostrations. This is just a small part of it. Getting the marrow by doing obeisance is a translation of Rai-hai Tokuzui. Master Eihei Dōgen said to his monks, "There are foolish monks who make a vow never to look at a woman. Is this vow based on the teachings of the Buddhas, or on the teachings of the non-Buddhists, or on the teachings of Mara?" Mara is the Buddhist equivalent of the devil, deceiver. What are the inherent faults of women, and what are the inherent virtues of men? There are unwholesome men and there are unwholesome women. Hoping to hear the Dharma and leave the household does not depend on being male or female. Before becoming free from delusion, men and women are equally not free from delusion. At the time of being free from delusion and realizing the truth, there is no difference between men and women. If you vow never to look at a woman, must you then abandon women when you chant, "Beings are numberless, I vow to save them"? That's another translation of the first of our four noble, our four bodhisattvic vows. All beings without number, I vow to liberate. If you do so, you are not a bodhisattva. How can you call it the Buddha's compassion? So that's the story we're going to be looking at. But before we get into that, just a bit more about Master Dōgen's life and a little bit about the time he came from. And for this I'm going to be reading from and commenting on passages from a book called Zen Master Dōgen, by Yu Ho Yokoi with Daisen Victoria. And this Daisen Victoria is actually a New Zealander, Brian Victoria, who at this time when this book came out was a Soto monk in Japan, but later left the order and wrote a couple of important books about Zen and war, about the involvement of various Zen teachers in the Second World War. So we touched on some of this, but we'll go into yesterday on Sunday, but we'll go into it in a bit more detail. So Dogen was born in Kyoto in 1200, and it was a time of change. Dogen was actually part of the aristocratic class that was still in power there in Kyoto, and had been for Kyoto had been Japan's imperial capital for 400 years at that point. But it was at this time that a new feudal government arose in Kamakura, outside Edo, which was to later become called Tokyo. And so the sort of the influence in the culture was shifting from this aristocratic class, this imperial class, who were urban and sophisticated, and you could even say somewhat effete. And the balance of power was shifting to the samurai class, who very often came from rural centres and had a greater kind of, you could say, simplicity and even earthiness to them. Buddhism had been developing in Japan at this point for 600 years, and at this time it was dominated by two schools, interlinked. The Tendai school, which was taught the main teachings of the Mahayana, the sutras, and then there was also the Shingon school, which was more akin to Vajrayana Buddhism, so it was esoteric, tantric Buddhism. And they had been in power a long time, and they had gathered a lot of wealth and become corrupted by that. Among the other practices were selling magic prayers, ceremonies to the aristocracy or whoever would pay, and the temples became very rich, and actually had at this point armed guards. These were monks who were armed, and sometimes engaged in warfare, skirmishes with rival groups of monks. It's interesting that this corruption, was selling of prayers and so forth, is a little bit like what was happening in Europe with the medieval church, where indulgences were sold to people, and the church gathered a great deal of power and wealth into itself. And so we mentioned on Sunday that contemporary with Master Dogen is St. Francis, and like Dogen, St. Francis was revitalized Christianity by offering a much more down to earth and stripped away teaching of Christianity. Many people saw this period as one of decline with this corruption that was in Buddhism, and it was often referred to as Mapo, the time of Mapo, which meant the Dharma-ending age. And one of the reactions to this decline was new movements coming up within Japan, and there were three: the Jodo, or the Pure Land, and Nichiren, and then the third of these was Zen itself. And Jodo and Nichiren were different, but they both involved a rejection of hierarchy and characterized not by ceremony and mystery like Shingon and Tendai, but we'd say simple piety and simple spiritual exercises that anybody could take up. And the writers of this book say dogma gave way to personal experience. Ritual and sacerdotalism, meaning power of the priests, gave way to piety and intuition. Moreover, these new sects exerted their influence across class bounds, exhibiting a growing concern for the common people. And this last part also refers to Zen. There was a new, there was a real sense of the teaching of anybody could awaken. You didn't have to be of a particular class, and Dōgen even teaching that in this extract that we're going to look at, that women could awaken, which was pretty much unheard of at the time. So taking up this narrative here about his life. So, as I already mentioned, he was born in 1200, and in a highly aristocratic family. His father was probably, there's some sort of argument about it, but was probably Kuga Michichika, who was a very high-ranking government minister. And Dōgen was, even as a very small child, was displayed his kind of brilliance, and he's said to be reading Chinese poetry at the age of 4, and a translation of a treatise on the Abhidharma by the age of 9. The Abhidharma is like voluminous collection of commentaries on the Buddhist teachings. It's one of the 3 baskets of the Tripitaka. So he was extremely precocious, but along with this brightness, he lost both his father and his mother at an early age. He was only 2 when his father died, and 7 when his mother died. And he was deeply marked by these events, and said that at his mother's funeral he was moved by the sight of the smoke rising, the smoke of the incense rising from the where the coffin was, and this sight, at this sight he vowed to enter the monkhood and seek the Dharma in order to answer the questions that had arisen in him about the meaning of life and death. And we can see in this his being prompted by seeing the smoke that he had a deeply sensitive, poetic sensibility. He was later to write about becoming a monk. Life is as transient as a dewdrop, and so, having been fortunate enough to be born as a human being, we should not waste our lives. If we lead the life of a monk in our successive existences, much merit will be accumulated. When death suddenly comes, neither the king nor his ministers, relatives, servants, wife or children, or rare jewels can save us. We are obliged to enter the realm of the dead alone, accompanied only by our good and bad karma. How desperately we cling to our body at death's door. Therefore, while we still retain our human body, we should quickly enter the monkhood. This is indeed the true teaching of the various Buddhas in the 3 stages of time, meaning past, present, and future. And what he means by becoming a monk is to really take up the practice in a wholehearted way. As he also recognised that as I mentioned about the lay people and whether male or female, people in any station in life could take up the Dharma. And elsewhere he says that it's the intensity of one's desire to awaken that is what really counts. When he was 13, he took the initial ordination on Mount Eihei, which was the center of learning for Tendai Buddhism in Japan at that time. It was not a single monastery, but a whole mountain complex of many different temples and monasteries. So he studied under the guidance of a master, Abbot Koen. But quite soon after, when he was just a year older, at 14, he became troubled by this question or deep doubting of an aspect of the Buddhist teaching. And this is how he formulated it. If, as the sutras say, all beings are endowed with the Buddha nature, why is it that one must train oneself so strenuously to realize the Buddha nature, that is, to attain enlightenment? And I'm sure many of us, when we're sitting and our knees are hurting and we're feeling really stuck, we may very well ask the same question. Why is it so difficult if we're intrinsically enlightened in the first place? And Dōgen hoped that his teacher would be able to really just wipe away this doubt for him. But he wasn't able to give him a satisfactory answer. And at this, Dōgen was very deeply disappointed. And he decided to leave Mount Eihei and go in search of someone who could set his mind at rest. One of the people he went to visit, among quite a few, was another abbot called Abbot Koen. He was the chief monk at Midera Monastery, which still exists, I think, in Shiga Prefecture. And he also was not able to give Dōgen a clear answer, and suggested that he go and see Eihei Zenji, who was then at that point in Kyoto at a temple called Kenninji. And Eihei was the originator of Rinzai Zen in Japan. And so the story goes that following the abbot's advice, Dōgen journeyed to Kenninji, and when he asked Eihei the same question, the Zen master replied, "All the Buddhas in the 3 stages of time are unaware that they are endowed with the Buddha nature, but cats and oxen are well aware of it indeed. So, was this a satisfactory answer to Dogen's question? In one way it was an extremely satisfactory answer, but we can be sure that it just deepened his questioning. But it is said that on hearing this reply, Dogen did experience an inner realization that partially dissolved his doubt and gave him a lot of faith in Eihei's having an understanding of Buddhism that he hadn't come across before. Just going back to this statement of Eihei's, all the Buddhas in the 3 stages of time are unaware that they are endowed with the Buddha nature, but cats and oxen are quite well aware of it indeed. Sometimes this is translated as cats and cows, which is got more euphony to think of it, and it makes me think of that yoga exercise, the cat-cow. So what's he saying here? The writers of this text say, in other words, the Buddhas, precisely because they are Buddhas themselves, no longer think of having or not having the Buddha nature. Only the animal-like, that is, the deluded, think in such terms. And this brings to the fore a theme that is going to come through in Master Dogen's teachings again and again. This notion of our forgetting ourselves, of not holding to a sense of self, and one of the ways we can in very succinct terms characterize what makes us suffer. It's our self-preoccupation, our self-partiality, where our world narrows down to our worries and our concerns about ourselves. So the forgetting of the self was to become a theme for in Master Dogen's teaching. So anyhow, from this experience, Dogen decided to stick around at Kenninji and study the teachings of Rinzai Zen under Eihei's guidance. But unfortunately, very soon after this, Eihei also died. So this was the Master Dogen's 3rd loss in his life, major loss. In one of his writings, a collection of his sayings actually called the Shobogenzo Suimonki, which was collected by one of his students, he talks about his meeting Eihei, and he compares him to the other masters that he had met, and he says that these other masters that he had seen had all just advised him to study hard until he became really learned, and he says, I was told to make myself known to the state and gain fame in the world. What a limited kind of piece of advice, and misguided. We've talked before about the fame being one of the 8 worldly winds, unreliable, and also kind of inherently unsettling to be concerned about one's faith and one's fame in the world. So after Eihei died, Dōgen continued to study under one of his disciples. He transmitted to 7 disciples, and one of these was Myozen, whose dates are 1184 to 1225. And so Dōgen continued his study of Zen with Myozen for 9 more years. And this is what Dōgen says about Myozen. Ever since I awakened to the Bodhi mind and sought the supreme truth, I made many visits to Buddhist masters throughout the country. It was thus that I happened to meet the Venerable Myozen at Keninji. 9 years quickly passed as I studied the way under him. During that period, I had the opportunity to learn from him to some extent the training methods of the Rinzai Zen school. To the Venerable Myozen, leading disciple of my late master Eihei, was rightly transmitted the highest supreme law, and he was unparalleled among his fellow disciples in learning and virtue. And in this little collection of his sayings, the Shobogenzo Zuimonki, he tells a story about Myozen, which made a big impression on me when I first read it. Myozen got criticized by his fellow monks because of his determination to leave his dying teacher. This was Myoyu, so his original master. That would be his precepts master. So probably the person he started to train under. So he's going to leave the dying Myoyu, his original master, to go to China to continue his training, in spite of the latter's request that Myozen remain by his side. In answer to their criticism, Myozen is quoted as saying, "You have all advised me to stay, but I cannot agree. Even if I stay here in Japan now, I cannot protect him," that is Myoyu, "from death if he is to die. Even if I stay here and nurse him, I cannot relieve him of his pain. Even though I treat his body with due ceremony at death, I cannot detach him from the transmigration of birth and death. To stay here is merely to obey his orders. It may be of great solace to him, but it is all useless in realizing enlightenment. If he should mistakenly hinder my earnest desire for the supreme truth, he will have committed a sin." Reading the story, it seemed quite harsh to me when I first read it. But at the same time, I could relate to it because I was at the time when I first read this very far away from family in New Zealand, 18,000 miles away. And I felt some of the sense of urgency that Myozen's words express, his yearning for realization and his sense of urgency. And in fact, Myozen accompanied Dōgen to China and died there. But have to be careful because there are also examples of the opposite. Nakagawa Soen Roshi, who was Roshi Kaplo's first teacher in Japan, took care of his mother in her old age. There was a little house at his monastery, and she lived there until she died. And Shodo Harada Roshi, who we read from in the last session, took care of one of his teachers, and don't remember now whether it was his tea master or his calligraphy teacher, but he took care of him until he died in his 90s. So this is not an absolute. There could be very well be times when the choice would have been the opposite. But one can imagine that Myozen's teacher Myoyu was probably in a big monastery with plenty of other monks there who were ready and available to look after him, even if emotionally he wanted to have his disciple Myozen there with him. So anyway, Dōgen and Myozen went off to China, and in 1223, and it was at that time, of course, a hazardous journey across the ocean, and it came into a port of Mingzhou, and Dōgen stayed on the ship for a while to kind of suss out what to do next. And he records an interesting meeting that he had with an elderly monk on board the ship. He met this monk who came one day to buy from some Japanese dried mushrooms that were being sold off the boat. Here's what Dōgen writes. And this he writes in another one of the fascicles of the, I think it's in the Shobogenzo, the Tenzo Kyokan, instructions for the head cook, which I really recommend as a good sample of Master Dōgen's teachings. So he tells the story of meeting this monk. I said to him, "When did you leave Ayuan Shan Monastery?" "After lunch." "How far is it from here?" "About 35 li," and I think this is about 20 kilometers. So he'd walked 20 kilometers to the port. "When are you going back?" "As soon as I've purchased some mushrooms." And then Dōgen replied, "I'm very glad to have this unexpected chance to meet and chat with you for a while here on board ship. Please allow me to serve you, Zen Master Tenzo." Tenzo replied, "I'm sorry, but without my supervision, tomorrow's meals will not go well." In such a large monastery as Ayuan Shan, there must be enough other cooking monks to prepare the meals. They can surely get along without a single Tenzo monk. Old as I am, I hold the office of Tenzo. This is my training during my old age. How can I leave this duty to others? Moreover, I didn't get permission to stay out overnight when I left, so he was going to walk back 20 kilometers to his monastery, having bought these mushrooms. And then Dōgen replies, "Venerable Sir, why don't you do Zazen or study the koan of ancient masters? What is the use of working so hard as a Tenzo monk?" On hearing my remarks, he broke into laughter and said, "Good foreigner, you seem to be ignorant of the true training and meaning of Buddhism." In a moment, ashamed and surprised at his remark, I said to him, "What are they?" "If you understand the true meaning of your question, you will have already realized the true meaning of Buddhism," he answered. At that time, however, I was unable to understand what he meant. So, in good Zen spirit, this Tenzo monk doesn't answer Dōgen's question, but bats the ball back into his court and invites him to find out for himself what the true meaning of Buddhism is. the writers add, the preceding episode clearly shows that at that time Dōgen was still unable to understand the essence of Zen. He had not yet realized that Zen is and must be expressed through our daily actions, be they cooking, cleaning, or whatever. And this also would later become a theme in Dogen's teaching, this emphasis on every action we take, everything becoming a way to experience the Buddha Dharma and express it. Interesting little kind of side point here. There's a biography of Dōgen by another monk, and it relates that when Dōgen went to Chinese temples, he would be assigned a low rank because he was not Chinese. And this practice of being ranked apparently was still happening in Chinese temples in the 20th century, that everybody who entered would be put in a certain position in the zendo, at the meals and so forth, according to how long they had been a monk. But this biographer relates that this Dōgen protested against this discrimination, which was just because of because he was a foreigner, saying that the monks should all be ranked by the length of time that had elapsed since their entrance into the monkhood. That's the traditional system, regardless of their nationality. And it says, at first, however, his protests went unheard. It is said that it was not until he made a final appeal to the emperor that his rank was determined on the same basis as that of the Chinese monks. But what is interesting about that is you would think that he might just think, oh, you know, I'll just put up with it and keep my head down. But rather, he sought his rightful place. He was clearly not just, you could say, a doormat, but stood up for his rights within the system. But in spite of this experience, he benefited from his training. By this stage, he was at a monastery called Tian Tong, which is still there and still active outside of Ningbo in South China. And he had another experience of a Tenzo monk, a head cook monk, there at Tian Tong. The importance of the office of Tenzo finally struck home to him as a result of an incident there, which is also recorded in the Tenzo Kyokan. It happened one day when Dōgen was going to the abbot's living quarters, located along the eastern corridor of the monastery. On the way, he came across an old, bare-headed Tenzo monk with a bamboo stick in his hand, earnestly drying some mushrooms in front of the Buddha hall. The sun's rays beat down upon him, causing him to perspire profusely, and this is a very hot part of China. It's known as the furnace of China. So the hot sun was beating down on him. Still, he continued to move here and there, drying the mushrooms, turning them. Moved by this sight, Dōgen drew near him and asked, "What is your Buddhist age?" And that means what is your age in years, but your age since you became a monk, number of years as a monk. 68, the Tenzo monk answered. Why don't you make the other cooking monks do under your supervision do this? They are not me. You are really one with Buddhism, but I wonder why you work so hard in the burning sun. When else can I do it but now? Dōgen said nothing. As he continued to walk along the corridor, he thought to himself how important the office of Tenzo was. He also witnessed a monk taking a little ritual in the zendo of putting his folded top robe, his case, on his head in the morning to do the verse of the case like we do still in the mornings. And he was deeply moved by this and had not been taught it in Japan. And he says, at the time I was filled with the deepest emotion and joy that I had ever experienced. Unknowingly I shed so many tears of gratitude that my collar became wet. Why? Though I had opened the sutras before and read of the verse concerning the placing of the case on one's head, I did not know the details of the manner in which it was to be done. Seeing it at that time before my very eyes filled me with great joy. So there were parts of the practice and the teaching and here a devotional piece of the picture that had not made their way to Japan, and at this point he was filled with gratitude for being able to come to China, being able to leave Japan and come to China to directly receive the teaching, not in words but in actions. He says, filled with these mixed feelings of happiness and sorrow, I cried copiously. Then I vowed to myself, with compassion for my fellow countrymen, I will, unworthy though I am, become an heir to Buddhism, a right receiver of the true way, and teach them the law that was correctly transmitted by the Buddhas and patriarchs, together with the case, the robe. So I think this little story can get a sense of Dogen's his emotional commitment to the practice and to the teaching, and his aspiration here. He's still searching, but the aspiration behind his search is this wanting to share the teaching with his fellow countrymen. In spite of the deeper understanding of Zen that Dogen realized during his training at Tiantung, he still felt spiritually incomplete. Hence he decided to leave that monastery in search of a master under whose guidance he might realize total liberation. For the next several months he visited numerous monasteries, but to no avail. Just as he was about to give up his search and return to Japan, he happened to hear that the former abbot of Tiantung had died, and that his successor, Ru Jing, was said to be one of China's finest Zen masters. On returning to that monastery, Dogen found that Ru Jing was indeed a Zen master in whom he could place his full confidence. In various works, he sings his late master's praises. His refusing to take a purple robe from the emperor, even though it was offered to him. So definitely not concerned with fame and recognition. With respect to Rujing's severe training, Dōgen writes, "My late master used to say, ever since I was 19 years old, I made numerous visits to monasteries in search of Buddhism, but without finding a true teacher. During this period, not a day or a night passed without my doing zazen seated on a meditation cushion. Even before I became head monk of this temple, I did not talk with those in my home village for fear that I would waste a single moment. I always lived in the meditation hall of the temple in which I resided, never entering anyone else's hermitage or dormitory, not to mention going on pleasure trips to mountains, lakes, and so on. Not only did I practice zazen at the appointed times in the meditation hall, but wherever and whenever it was possible to practice it, I did so." Rujing would go from place to place with a meditation cushion concealed in the sleeve of his robe. Must have been big sleeves. "It was my intention to sit so hard as to make this cushion fall into tatters. This was my only wish. As a result, my buttocks sometimes became inflamed, causing hemorrhoids, but I liked zazen, so much the better." So finally, you could say that Dōgen had met somebody who was his equal in zeal, and offered him an example of the kind of intensity that is required. And then we'll just finish up with this account of Master Dōgen's awakening, final awakening under Rujing. "Early one morning, as he was making his usual round of inspection at the beginning of the formal zazen period, Rujing discovered one of the monks dozing. Scolding the monk, he said, 'The practice of zazen is the dropping away of body and mind. What do you expect to accomplish by dozing?' Upon hearing these words, Dōgen suddenly realized enlightenment, his mind's eye opening fully. According to going to Rujing's room to have his enlightenment confirmed as genuine, Dōgen burned some incense and prostrated himself before his master." This was the traditional way of kicking off this encounter. "What do you mean by this?" Rujing asked. So he's testing the water. "I've experienced the dropping away of body and mind," Dōgen replied. Rujing, realizing that Dōgen's enlightenment was genuine, then said, "You have indeed dropped body and mind." Dōgen, however, remonstrated, "I have only just realized enlightenment. Don't sanction me so easily." "I'm not sanctioning you easily." Dōgen, still unsatisfied, persisted. "What is the basis for your saying that you haven't sanctioned me easily?" Rujing replied, "Body and mind dropped away." Hearing this, Dōgen prostrated himself before his master in deep respect and gratitude, showing that he had indeed transcended his discriminating mind. Well, we'll stop there and continue with this next time. All beings without number, I vow to liberate. Endless blind passions, I vow to uproot. Dharma gates beyond measure, I vow to penetrate. The great way of Buddha, I vow to attain. All beings without number, number, I vow to liberate endless blind passions, I vow to uproot dharma gaze beyond measure, I vow to penetrate the great way of Buddha, I vow to attain all beings without number, I vow to liberate endless blind passions, I vow to uproot dharma gaze beyond measure, I vow to penetrate the great way of Buddha, I vow to attain.
The teaching you have received is offered freely. If you would like to make a donation to support the continuation of this podcast service or learn more about practice opportunities at the Auckland Zen Centre, please visit www.aucklandzen.org.nz.